the night of May 10, 1941, a lone German aircraft crossed the North Sea under the cover of darkness. Its pilot, one of Adolf Hitler's closest allies, was on a secret mission. He flew not toward an enemy, but toward the enemy's heart itself, Great Britain. When the plane crash-landed in the Scottish countryside, the man who emerged wasn't a spy or a defector in the usual sense. It was Rudolf Hess, Deputy Führer of Nazi Germany. Why did one of Hitler's most trusted men abandon his post, risking everything in a solo flight into enemy territory? What was he hoping to achieve? And what did he know? Rudolf Hess's story begins long before the war, in the turbulence of the early 20th century. Born in Alexandria, Egypt, in 1894 to a wealthy German merchant family, Hess's youth was one of privilege shadowed by the instability of empire. When World War I erupted, he volunteered for the Imperial German Army, serving first as an infantryman and later as a pilot in the German Air Service. He was wounded, decorated, and deeply marked by the defeat of 1918, a humiliation he, like many others, would never forgive. In the chaotic aftermath of the war, as Germany staggered under the weight of the Versailles Treaty, Hess returned to a nation in despair. It was in this crucible of economic collapse, political violence, and national humiliation that Hess encountered a rising political movement, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Drawn by its rhetoric of rebirth and vengeance, Hess joined the party in 1920. It was here that he met a man whose ideas and charisma would change his life, Adolf Hitler. Hess quickly became one of Hitler's most devoted followers. His loyalty bordered on the fanatical. When Hitler dictated Mein Kampf during his imprisonment after the failed Beer Hall Putsch in 1923, it was Hess who acted as his secretary, writing down and editing much of the text. Their bond was intimate and absolute. Hess once wrote, "If the Führer told me the earth is flat, I would believe him." As the Nazi Party rose from obscurity to power, Hess was always close at hand. He became Hitler's private secretary, trusted confidant, and ultimately Deputy Führer, a position that placed him among the top ranks of the Third Reich. But unlike Göring or Himmler, Hess was not a man of raw ambition or power. He lacked the cunning of Himmler or the bombastic energy of Goebbels. Instead, he was an ideologue, a man consumed by mystical ideas about race, destiny, and astrology. He believed utterly in Hitler's mission, viewing him as a kind of messianic figure destined to save Germany. When war erupted in 1939, Hess's role began to wane. As the Nazi state expanded, his influence diminished, overshadowed by the more ruthless and pragmatic figures around him. The Deputy Führer, once central to Hitler's inner circle, became increasingly sidelined. His duties were largely administrative, handling party affairs, organizing bureaucracy, signing decrees. But he was no longer involved in major strategic or military planning. The Führer had outgrown his disciple. By 1941, as Germany stood on the brink of invading the Soviet Union, Hess found himself adrift. He watched from the sidelines as Hitler and his generals prepared for a war that Hess feared would doom Germany. In his mind, there was only one path to salvation: peace with Britain. Hess believed that Germany and Britain were natural allies, two Aryan powers that should unite against Bolshevism rather than destroy each other. And so, he conceived an idea that would become one of the most bizarre episodes of the entire war. Acting entirely on his own initiative, without Hitler's knowledge or approval, Hess resolved to fly to Britain, meet with sympathetic figures, and negotiate a peace treaty. It was an act of staggering naivete, perhaps even madness, but one he pursued with absolute conviction. For months, Hess studied flight routes and practiced long-distance navigation in secret. He trained on a Messerschmitt Bf 110, a twin-engine fighter capable of making the journey across the North Sea. His plan was simple, if delusional. Fly to Scotland, land near the estate of the Duke of Hamilton, whom Hess believed to be sympathetic to peace, and deliver a personal message from himself, and by extension, from Germany. On the evening of May 10, 1941, as German bombers pounded London, Hess took off from Augsburg. He was alone, flying under cover of darkness, guided by a map, a compass, and a blind faith in his mission. He carried nothing but a few personal items, documents, and a parachute. For over 4 hours, he flew north across the North Sea, skimming the waves to avoid British radar. But the mission did not go as planned. Somewhere over Scotland, his aircraft ran low on fuel. As he approached his target area near Glasgow, he bailed out, parachuting into a field near the village of Eaglesham. Local farmers spotted the crash and alerted the authorities. Hess, injured from the landing, identified himself not as a Nazi leader, but under the alias Alfred Horn. It didn't take long, however, for the truth to emerge. When British officers realized who he was, disbelief turned to confusion. The Deputy Führer of Nazi Germany, Hitler's right-hand man, had just fallen into their hands, voluntarily. It was one of the most extraordinary events of the war. News of Hess's capture was kept secret for days as British intelligence tried to determine his motives. He was interrogated repeatedly by MI5 officers and later by Lord Simon and the Duke of Hamilton himself. Hess claimed he had come to Britain on a mission of humanity. He insisted that he sought no surrender, only peace, an understanding between two great nations. But his grasp of political reality was tenuous at best. By this point in 1941, Britain had been at war with Germany for nearly 2 years. The Blitz had devastated London. The Luftwaffe had killed tens of thousands of civilians. Any notion of negotiating with Hitler's regime was politically impossible. Churchill, upon hearing the news, dismissed Hess as a mental case. To the British government, the flight was not an opportunity for peace, but a bizarre and potentially valuable intelligence windfall. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Hitler's reaction was one of shock, fury, and betrayal. He refused to believe it at first. Hess, his loyal disciple, gone rogue? But the truth was undeniable. In a state of rage, Hitler stripped Hess of all titles and declared him insane. The regime went into damage control, announcing that Hess had suffered from mental illness and had undertaken the flight without authorization. For Hess, captivity in Britain was the beginning of a long descent into obscurity and madness. He was held first in the Tower of London, then in various military prisons under heavy guard. British interrogators were both fascinated and disturbed by his behavior. He alternated between lucidity and paranoia, claiming that his food was poisoned, that his guards were imposters, that doubles had replaced key Nazi officials. He refused to believe the war reports he was shown, convinced they were fabrications designed to demoralize him. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Hess's delusions about a potential peace evaporated completely. His mission had failed. Britain never used him for propaganda. Churchill saw little value in publicizing the bizarre defection. Instead, Hess languished in silence, forgotten by both sides. After Germany's defeat in 1945, Hess was transferred to Nuremberg to stand trial with the other surviving Nazi leaders. He appeared frail, detached, and visibly unwell. During the proceedings, his mental state again became a subject of debate. He claimed at one point to have lost his memory, only to later declare that he had faked amnesia to protect himself. At Nuremberg, Hess was charged with crimes against peace and conspiracy to wage aggressive war. Although he had not been directly involved in military operations or atrocities, he had been a central figure in the Nazi hierarchy, part of the machinery that enabled Hitler's aggression. The tribunal found him guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment. Hess was taken to Spandau Prison in Berlin, where he would spend the rest of his life. Over the years, his fellow inmates, such as Albert Speer and Karl Dönitz, were gradually released, but Hess remained. Decades passed, the Cold War began and ended, yet Rudolf Hess, the last prisoner of Spandau, remained in his cell. His isolation became legendary. For many years, he was the sole inmate in the entire prison, guarded by rotating Allied contingents from Britain, France, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Each month, 4 powers maintained this immense, near-empty fortress for a single man. Hess's mental state deteriorated further. He refused medical treatment, went on hunger, and obsessed over conspiracy theories. He maintained that his 1941 flight had been a mission of peace, that history would one day vindicate him. But to most, he was a relic, a forgotten symbol of a regime that had long since collapsed. Then, in August 1987, at the age of 93, Rudolf Hess was found dead in the garden of Spandau Prison. The official report stated suicide by hanging, using an electrical cord from a lamp, but his death sparked immediate controversy. His family and many sympathizers claimed he had been murdered to prevent his release. Conspiracy theories flourished, suggesting British or Soviet involvement. No conclusive evidence ever emerged. With Hess's death, Spandau Prison was demolished. Nothing remains of the building today, only fragments of memory, photographs, and the ghost of a story that never fully made sense. Hess remains one of the great enigmas of the Nazi era. He was neither a monster like Himmler nor a calculating opportunist like Goering. He was, instead, a fanatic believer, a man driven by faith, delusion, and blind loyalty. His flight to Scotland stands as one of the strangest acts of the Second World War, a desperate, almost mystical gesture from a man lost between duty and madness. In the end, Rudolf Hess's story is not one of heroism or redemption, but of obsession. The story of a man who believed he could alter the course of history through the sheer force of conviction, and who instead became trapped in its shadow forever. When Rudolf Hess climbed into his aircraft that night in 1941, he believed he was flying toward peace. Instead, he flew straight into infamy. His strange mission changed nothing, and his name became a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind faith and absolute loyalty. Was Hess a misguided idealist trying to save his country, or simply a madman chasing delusion? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of World War II's most mysterious figures, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell for more historical documentaries every week. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.